Our vehicles make lots of crazy noises when things wear out or maintenance needs done. Signs and symptoms of a worn wheel bearing are humming, rumbling, or a growling noise, which typically increases with acceleration or as you turn the vehicle. As we track straight in our 2003 Century, we turn it to the right, we really don't hear an increase in noise. So when we turn our wheels to the left as we drive, we hear a noticeable noise in the right front wheel and we can feel the grinding. We think our issue is a worn wheel bearing in the hub assembly up front. We're going to tackle that job today. Now, with the vehicle secure on level ground, there's one final check to verify that the right front wheel bearing is our issue. Tip the wheel at 12 and 6 o'clock and feel for slack, and then again at 9 and 3. And here at 9 and 3 o'clock, I definitely feel some play in that bearing, again verifying our problem. Now, on our 03 Century that we're working on, just basic hand tools are all that's required. Some vehicles require some specialty tools. Be sure you get the right tool for this job. Probably the most important tool, the Haynes Repair Manual. We've both been guilty of this, not reading all the information before we tackle the job. You got to do it here. You want to know the way in and you want to know the right way out. Most importantly, you want to know the right torque specs for this job. It's critically important so you're not having to repeat this thing. Now, before we jack the vehicle up, we loosened the axle nut while it was down on the ground and I had a buddy hold the brake on. Because honestly, with the big breaker bar up against the parking gear, you could break something. So with the brake on, we loosened the axle nut. Now we're ready to pull the wheel and dive in. The next step is to remove the caliper. I've got the mounting bolts out, and I like to secure it up on the strut, coil spring, with a bungee cord because I don't like any tension on the brake line. Next, remove the rotor. Now we're going to take off the axle nut. And we've pre-loosened this, but on some vehicles, there's a nylon lining inside that nut, and you've got to fight it all the way off. To take that off, get yourself a pry bar, get everything secure, and go ahead and back it off. All right, now we move to the back side of the hub assembly. There's 3 mounting bolts that we saw in the Haynes manual. We're going to start with the lower one. It's 13 millimeter. And you want to be really sure at this point you don't do any damage to the CV boot. Also, while you're in here, a good visual inspection of all things related to the spindle and the wheel. Just check for wear, check for leaks. Put a long extension on. We got good access. And as per usual, access is the hardest part. Now here's a great tip. Before you pull the old worn hub assembly out, you want to take a few rags and stuff them down under the CV boot, creating a landing pad of sorts for that axle. When you pull the hub assembly off, the axle's going to want to drop, and you don't want to damage the CV boot. That's a great way to protect it. Now, with a little bit of work and encouragement from the pry bar, you can work that hub assembly loose. It's ready to pull out right in your hand. A little bit more encouragement, that hub assembly comes off. Now, check your Haynes Repair Manual because some vehicles require a puller to get this separated from the axle and subsequently a press to put it back on the right way. Your manual will tell you everything you need to know. This wasn't too bad. Now, I want to show you the new hub assembly we're going to put on. You can see everything's in great shape, nice and clean. You can see the splines are in great shape. But a lot of vehicles have ABS, and everything looks the same except for that wiring harness for the ABS wheel speed sensor. I can't stress enough, take care of this wiring harness, take care of that connector. You don't want more problems later after you do this difficult job. The next step is to clean the face of the spindles so we get a really good fit, as well as clean the splines on the axle shaft itself, again, so we get a great fit in the new wheel bearing assembly. And finally, hit the splines with a little WD-40, wipe it down and get any loose contaminants, metal shavings, anything you got, just get that all wiped off. So with the splines good and clean, you want to reinstall the ABS bracket. Again, our vehicle doesn't have an ABS system, but this bracket has an important job. It creates the proper spacing for the new hub assembly. Put it back on just like you found it. Work hard not to bend this thing. You want to take good care of that bracket, and then reinstall the new hub assembly. So I've worked the new hub assembly on as far as I can get it. Now I'm going to use the new nut and actually press it back on enough so that I can get the mounting bolts in from the back and actually draw it up good and snug. Using the new nut is incredibly important if you're going to do this job right. In many applications, the new nut is going to be the means by which you get the torque setting just right. So you've got to be sure to replace that outer nut. So gently start working it in. It's going to draw that hub assembly right up. Be gentle, be patient, and go slow through this whole process. You don't want to damage anything. And you definitely don't want to hammer on this brand new assembly. No reason to damage it. You want to tighten these down evenly. Don't overbear them on the first pass, just snug them up and try to pull them down evenly. Work your way back around, and most importantly, check for the torque specs. You've got to get these right. Next, we reinstall the rotor, get it seated, and here's a tip. I like to add a lug nut here to help hold that rotor in place when I go to reinstall the caliper. It makes things a lot easier. There's only one thing moving, which is the caliper. Bring it down, set it on the rotor, add the caliper mounting bolts. We're almost home. With the caliper remounted and the bolts torqued properly, take a little bit of brake clean, spray the face of the rotor. I'm going to do front and back, and clean off some of your dirty fingerprints that have grease and oils on them from doing the job. We've got our calipers reinstalled, and we're ready to tighten that outer axle nut. We're going to do it in 2 stages. The Haynes repair manual is very clear. It says 159 pounds. I'm going to first torque it to 120, then reset my wrench and go up to 159. There we go. All set. All right, 159 foot-pounds of torque isn't too hard to hold. My buddy Rick has got the brake pedal pressed down, holding that rotor from spinning. Some vehicle applications, it's 225, 250 foot-pounds. It's a lot of energy. In that scenario, you're going to have to lower the vehicle down, load the suspension, and go ahead and torque the nut to its final setting. I recommend you doing that in 2 phases, approximately half. If it's 230, torque it to 115 with the buddy holding the brake pedal on. At that point, lower the vehicle down and go ahead and finish the torque spec up to the 230 foot-pounds. We're ready for our wheel. Well, we said it at the beginning of the project, and we're going to finish up with the same message. Torque specs are everything on this project. We followed the Haynes manual requirements all the way throughout the job. Why wouldn't we torque the lug nuts down to the proper setting, which is 100 foot-pounds? Always do these in a crisscross pattern, and you're going to be done with this project.